This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody. 1, 2, 3, let me go.
Ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining me once again. Had a comment right off the bat after our podcast dropped on Monday that was wondering, when are we going to hear about the SMU basketball team? Well, trust me, if you kept listening, told you about the 5-for-5 plan, here we are, SMU basketball. We're going to break it all down on this podcast. But first, guys, I got to remind you guys that we are presented by our friends at StatusJet. StatusJet.com. You could head over there and learn more about what David Henry and his team can do for you. And look, it's not just about flights for them. It's about that incredible experience, start to finish, from the journey to that flight, after, and then getting you back home safely as well. Whether you're heading to cheer on SMU or going on a fun trip with family and friends or a business trip, you've got to reach out to our friends at StatusJet. They can handle everything with that first-class attention to detail that you'd expect from a private jet charter experience. You can give them a call, 866-404-9791, and mention code PONYUPACC for a discount on a round-trip flight with StatusJet. And also mention that you heard about them from ontheponyexpress.com. David Henry and his team are proud supporters of SMU Athletics and also the On the Pony Express podcast. So reach out to our friends at statusjet.com for more details. We talked about on Monday all the different things that have happened during this time away from podcasting. But the biggest news, honestly, has been the change in leadership for SMU basketball. And before all of that happened, we had the change from Rob Lanier. We were there to cover it for you guys and obviously teed up kind of what was coming and the change that was going on within the program. But now SMU has its new leader of SMU basketball, and that's Andy Enfield, a guy who comes from USC after 11 seasons of winning at a pretty high level and a pretty consistent clip. When you look at the guys who SMU considered, really the list was short. It started and pretty much ended with Andy Enfield. And there's a lot of different takes you could probably have on that. But as we covered the search, look, there was those initial names that we listed on our site that were very much interested, very much in play if this didn't come together with Andy Enfield. But we knew that going into that first weekend of the search, SMU was already out in Los Angeles. And this was also confirmed by the school as well at the press conference. David Miller mentioned it as well. President Turner mentioned that they were on him early on, and it just took a minute to work through the things that they honestly probably thought were going to be a little easier to work through when it came to USC letting Andy Enfield go. But nonetheless, they were out there in Los Angeles the first weekend of that search, meeting with him, talking with him about their plan for the university. And, you know, David Miller got hooked up with Andy Enfield years back, working with one of SMU's other major donors to end up playing golf together. And so that always stuck with David Miller. And when they looked at this search, and David Miller told this story about how they went into the search for Rob Lanier's replacement, and especially the lead up to, and they were wondering, what's the interest level going to be like? And it was very high. And there were a lot of coaches, quite honestly, at the Power Five, and in particular, quite honestly, SEC coaches that were kind of jockeying for this job. And at the end of the day, SMU had already zeroed in on a guy who has been to the NCAA tournament, been deep in the NCAA tournament at multiple schools as well. He had that magical run with Florida Gulf Coast deep into the NCAA tournament, and then went to USC after the first 2 years when they were turning that program around. Remember, way pre-transfer portal on that front. They went on a very consistent run of making the NCAA tournament, making the postseason. He would have had more NCAA tournament appearances if not for COVID canceling one of the tournaments. And he just really checked all the boxes for SMU. And I think when I evaluate this hire, I look at it from the standpoint of Andy Enfield is hired. He is the guy So how is he going to do at SMU? And then there's another piece which we'll evaluate as these next college basketball seasons go and the totality of his tenure at SMU goes, which is how did Andy Enfield fare? How did some of the other kind of players in this search when it came to interest? Eric Musselman was rumored at one point, but I was told that was pretty inaccurate from all the different sources that I talked with. We knew that there was Chris Jans at Mississippi State who was interested. Will Wade was interested at one point. There are a lot of different names that were interested. And so tracking how all of that happens, how all of those different tenures go at different schools will be kind of how you judge this coaching cycle. And remember, SMU hiring Andy Enfield ultimately led to John Calipari leaving Kentucky for Arkansas and that big deal with John Tyson to bring him to Fayetteville. And so Andy Enfield, though, as a hire, you're looking at by far the most successful coach outside of Larry Brown that SMU has been able to bring to campus in decades. And Larry Brown was somebody that some of the people at SMU didn't even want. And they ended up bringing him on board after things fell apart in that coaching search. And it worked out. And we see the blueprint that Larry Brown laid out for how SMU can be successful. Well, Andy Enfield has done it at a somewhat similar program that has to deal with kind of that private institution, didn't necessarily have the basketball tradition. Remember, Andy Enfield is the third most winningest coach in USC history, and he's been able to build that program into a NCAA tournament team. And then when they hit some down years, he was able to reset and get them back to the NCAA tournament. And he's done it through recruiting the high school ranks. The transfer portal is something that is still relatively new to him, I would say, just compared to an SMU, which has seen Tim Jankovich and Larry Brown as pre-transfer portal, but seen a program that has thrived when they've been able to get quality transfers to elevate this program at different points. Andy Enfield is going to need to take advantage of the transfer portal at some point, which we'll get to make sure this roster is ready for the ACC in year one. And look, it is going to be a process. In my opinion, SMU is going to hope that they can get to the ACC tournament, maybe make some noise here and there in year one. But they hired Andy Enfield because there has been, and this is, as somebody who's watched multiple coaches try to do it here, and all three, really, since I've covered the program consistently, have done it very different ways. You've had Larry Brown, who had the spark, the flair, the Hall of Fame resume, brought in key transfers, and obviously built Moody Magic back into what it can be. You had Tim Jankovich, who very much did it a different way, kind of didn't necessarily have any sort of real flair about how he went about it. There were some puzzling decisions, things like that. Rob Lanier, hard-nosed, changed the culture, was building something. I don't think it would have worked out in the ACC, but now you have somebody at the helm who has done it at the Power 5 ranks, and he has done it consistently more than many other college basketball coaches have in their careers, and he's now closer to family. His wife's family's from Mustang, Oklahoma. They were able to visit with his mother-in-law right away and came down and all of that once he got to SMU. He's back closer to kind of where he's from, which is ACC country, got his start as a Florida State assistant before rising up the ranks and all of that. He's very familiar with what SMU is going into, and it's probably time for a change. And USC did not prioritize their basketball program like SMU is prepared and pushing to do right now. But I think the most important thing that SMU wanted is they wanted somebody who could reignite the fan base through recruiting the high school ranks and building a consistently high floor of a program. Now, what does that look like for SMU when it goes into the ACC? I don't know. I don't know what fans are going to sit here and say, man, that's a great season. That's what we're looking for. Obviously, the goal is to always win a national championship and to win a conference championship and punch your ticket to March Madness. The high floor that SMU wants to be at is consistently in the NCAA tournament. And Andy Enfield has done that, and he's reinvented himself in terms of his USC team twice. He was able to build the program pre-transfer portal. They were able to start going to the NCAA tournament. They hit a lull. He was able to rebuild and get them back into that mix. And remember, 2023, the 2022-2023 season, USC was very good. They had a down year this year. They faced some injuries, didn't come together. They were playing really well late in the season once they were all healthy, but ultimately it was a season filled with what ifs. And so this isn't going to come with a large amount of splash, but make no mistake about it, SMU was able to go out and snag a sitting Power 5 coach with numerous NCAA tournament appearances, over 21 wins in a season in 7 of his 11 seasons at USC. And again, that's counting those first 2 where they were in total rebuild mode. I just feel like you have a very high floor with this hire of Andy Enfield because he knows how to build. And that's something that I feel like SMU kind of had in Rob Lanier. He was trying to build it and do it his own way. I just don't think he had this on the right track for the ACC. I think Rob Lanier, who's the new head coach at Rice, is going to do just fine down there. I think for Rice, I think they're going to be just fine. And that's a program that has really struggled to win. I think he's a good fit there. I don't think moving forward, it was going to be a good fit at SMU, which enter Andy Enfield. This is a really good fit. He didn't necessarily win the press conference by any means, but you can tell he's really, I think, measured in his approach. He knows what he wants in a team, and he knows what it takes to get to the NCAA tournament and do it consistently. He built his resume as a recruiter for Florida State, one of the top recruiters in the country. He was able to consistently bring in top recruiting classes at USC. Now what they needed is to have that commitment to the program to take it to the next level. That's where SMU sold their plan and said, hey, here's everything we want to do. Let's go do this. Let's go do this together. And the early returns I've gotten on this hire have been rather good. And it's more so the dynamics of how is this program going to be built? And you look at Andy Enfield, and he's done it for 11 seasons at USC. He said in his press conference, this is his plan to do this one more time. Go build a program, go be great, all of those things. And so you hear that and you say, okay, he views this as his final stop, which is fine. But how can you sit here and say for sure he's the guy? And I just from hearing around different people around the program now, people involved, and all of the different ways that he's been engaged since arriving on SMU's campus already, I'm encouraged. He brought a lot of his staff from USC, Chris Kapko, Kurt Karras, Eric Mobley. Jay Morris is going to be officially announced at some point. He was in the picture with Andy Enfield with the Final Four trophy on campus, brought his strength coach. They're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in the early goings. And now he wants to find the different pockets of the program where he can add the right pieces to say, okay, we're in Texas now. We've brought a lot of the staff that I trust in terms of recruiting, trust in terms of building the program. But now we've got to add some Texas flair and some other pieces to this puzzle so that we can be successful at SMU. It's a change from USC. It's obviously Texas. It's a different dynamic here. It's a different recruiting base that he is going to now have to navigate. And SMU has been able to do something I think that USC didn't do as much of under Andy Enfield, which is really nail the transfer portal. And SMU has been able to build the general consensus on what SMU basketball can be on the backs of transfers. I mean, save Shake Milton, Dre Foster, Sterling Brown, Ben Moore, there's been, for the most part, transfers, and Zurich Phelps, transfers that have led this program to the great moments that it's had. And so if you couple Andy Enfield's ability to recruit, which he's done well, with the blueprint of the transfer portal, which they are working on, and again, we'll talk about, this should be a marriage that might not yield this incredible season in year one. You're going to have to, because of what we saw last year, from this team, sit here and say, okay, I've probably got to temper expectations. I think most people do that. This is a very different roster and situation than what football is dealing with going into the ACC. SMU basketball is dealing with a roster that I think won one game against a good team this year, one or two. They're going to potentially have some moments of learning. The goal is to get to the ACC tournament, because not everybody makes it. If you don't know that, as SMU goes into the ACC, the top I think 15 teams make the ACC tournament, and I'm probably wrong on that number myself, but I'm still learning the new world of the ACC as well. But so you're going to take your lumps. So it's very important that you find players that could help you right away, but also you want to still build this roster in the right direction. So Andy Enfield and his staff are working on that. Overall, though, in closing, and we'll move on to the transfer portal, I like the hire a lot. I think it says a lot that they went out and got somebody who's been to the NCAA tournament as consistently as he has. He's been able to do it through high-level recruiting. He's dabbled a little in the transfer portal. And in my opinion, based on what I've heard of what SMU wants to do for him resource-wise, in particular NIL, you're looking at a coach that has better access to resources to succeed at the highest level that he can. Now, again, this is going to be a change. Andy Enfield, very different from Rob Lanier. So they're going to maybe be some growth that has to happen before they can be a team that is seriously making noise in the ACC. But what SMU didn't want to do is they didn't want to go down the road that it looked like this team was going to go down, which is in a much better conference, really not be able to compete, be kind of a laughing stock. At least now you've revitalized this program in terms of interest. People want to see what Andy Enfield and his staff are going to do. And so far, we've only seen 2 transfers leave off the scholarship ranks. Emory Lanier, of course, has left the program to go with his dad, Rob, down to Rice. But you saw Mo and Jai, Xavier Foster, 2 true big men that, quite honestly, this year was not what they were looking for. They entered the transfer portal. There's going to be another name that probably just retires from basketball overall, or moves on to the professional ranks, I should say, in the front court. And SMU will have to find a way to upgrade that group overall. And at the end of the day, that's going to be very important, because we know what Keon Ambrose Hilton can bring to the table. Jaheim Hudson, who's somebody that most people would have pegged as a transfer portal candidate. You probably would have said, okay, he's going to follow Rob Lanier. He followed, Rob Lanier from Georgia State after a year to SMU. Well, he's sticking around so far. And they're going to have some opportunities, I think, to address the front court. But they really have to pick and choose their spots here, because I think Andy Enfield, based on what I've heard about him, based on his comments, he would rather fill a spot that maybe, some people would bring in a depth play from the transfer portal and say, okay, this guy's going to help us a little bit, maybe emerge in the next year. He would rather bring in a high school guy. So, for example, they brought in Brody Kozlowski, one of their top commitments at USC. He was on campus this weekend for an official visit, spending the time on the hilltop with his family. He's a 4-star prospect, just on the edge of being a top 100 prospect overall in the country on the On3 industry ranking. He was on campus, but that's a prime example there of, hey, we don't necessarily want to bring in a transfer that might be more of a depth guy. We want to go ahead and bring in somebody who could be with us for multiple years, emerge as a really impressive player. And Brody Kozlowski is somebody that I think has that ability to be a very, very good player. They're going to keep chipping away on him. It sounds like he's going to take other visits, but SMU is not in at this point, deep world of 10 scholarship players leaving, total rebuild. They're in a situation where they have some pieces that this staff likes. They need to supplement. They need to get bigger. They need to get tougher overall. And they need to do that at certain spots. And I think the 3 is a prime example of that. If you can bring in a Brody Kozlowski to pair with, let's say, retaining a Jaheim Hudson, Keon Ambrose Hilton could squeeze out as a big 3 at times. You have the potential to really elevate that position. It just didn't have that consistent play enough, I feel like. And so bringing in a highly touted freshman is something that SMU is certainly kicking the tires on, with Brody Kozlowski being in the transfer portal. So that was their big high school visitor this weekend. But by my count, you look at Chance Puryear coming in. He was a Rob Lanier signee from the Dallas area, Dallas Carter, small forward. You look at what he could bring to the table. And he was, highly thought of coming out of Carter, and kind of dealt with some injuries here and there throughout his senior season that kind of held him back, I think, from really emerging. But you look at him and you look at Mitchell Holmes, the 6'11" big man who's from Arlington, who's played kind of all over in his high school career. You're looking at a trio, potentially, if they can get Brody Kozlowski, of freshmen that would be really impressive and are building blocks at key spots for the future for this program. So as of now, Chance Puryear, Mitchell Holmes, both remain signed with SMU. I haven't heard anything at this point that says they're going to be either cut loose or leave just yet. And we'll keep an eye on those guys to see what happens and see if anything changes. Now, it's time to talk about the transfer portal and really kind of go in depth on kind of what the plan kind of looks like early on here, because this is a kind of a conversation that is hard to have on the board with some of our On the Pony Express subscribers. And if you haven't been on the board, we've at least had you guys covered on who's visited, who's in play, kind of how things are working out here in the transfer portal. So again, subscribe for $1 and get 2 months of ontheponyexpress.com using code SMU1. That's SMU, the number 1, to get 2 months for just $1 of ontheponyexpress.com. So head over there. We've got the scoop on the transfers. There are a few names that are out there in the public, and we talked about a few of them on the board, but let me kind of lay out the lay of the land here and how SMU is going to approach the transfer portal at this stage and approach the roster at this stage with Andy Enfield and his staff. So let's look at this roster right now. You have in the backcourt, you have BJ Edwards, who I've heard sounds like he's going to stick around. They like what he could bring to the table. You have Zurich Phelps, Jalen Smith, and Chuck Harris, who all seem like they're going to return. 3 key pieces there that this staff likes. You have Ricardo Wright and Denver Anglin. I haven't heard anything about them leaving. Again, this is kind of the same thing in football. We're sitting in that current time frame where anything can happen. And, 1 minute you think you're in the clear, and the next moment you're seeing guys enter the portal. So that's kind of the caveat with all of this discussion. But as it stands, you have 6 guys in the backcourt that you really are sitting here, expecting SMU to have next season on its roster. The key will be development. And I think you go back to Andy Enfield's work with guards in the past, you're going to expect some of these guys to take a step forward. Zurich Phelps, Chuck Harris, Jalen Smith. We've been waiting on these guys to take the next step. And I think they're going to have the opportunity to, if they stick around, which at this point looks like they are. And if they do, then those are your key pieces for the backcourt. And so where do you go from there? And this is the conversation that this coaching staff kind of has to have. Well, you probably need a point guard to come in and help you right away. And initially, Frankie Collins, Arizona State transfer, was going to visit. And SMU ultimately turned its attention elsewhere. And that has really opened the door for Drew Thelwell from Morehead State to visit this week. He's at Iowa right now. He is going to visit SMU on Thursday if all goes according to plan. And this is one of the top available transfer point guards out there. And he's got interest in and from Miami. He's got programs around the country looking to bring in his 10 points, 6.2 assists, and 3 rebounds per game. He's one of the winningest players you could find out there in the transfer portal. He's got 94 career wins at Morehead State. He's the all-time winningest player in Morehead State history. Michigan, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, TCU, and others are in contact with him as well. SMU is hoping that they can reel him in. And if they can, which associate head coach Chris Kapko has ties to the state of Florida. He's from Lakeland, right down the road from myself in the Tampa area. Orlando, right on the other side of Lakeland as well. This is kind of where I think SMU is going to potentially find a sweet spot in recruiting. Florida, outside of Texas and California, are 2 of the top states, is one of the 3 top states for SMU in terms of students that they bring in. And I've said this from football, and I'll say this for basketball. When you look at your base of admissions, I think SMU's coaches should continue to mine areas that SMU already has students from. And so drawing on those ties, and I played the Masters Academy in football in high school, you can say, hey, we've got a lot of Florida kids. Come finish your career at SMU. We've got a lot of Florida kids in our student population. Hey, Chris Kapko is the one recruiting him. He's from Florida. There are some ties at work here. And so if SMU can get him, he's got a winning DNA. He's a distributor, and that would allow Chuck Harris and Zurich Phelps in particular to still handle the ball, but also not have that pressure of having to run the show. And like we saw last year with BJ Edwards kind of taking his lumps as, a point guard, you've got to upgrade this position. And I expect point guard to be the position, I would say the position that they feel like they really need to make a move with. And so you have Drew Thelwell in the transfer portal, and right now he's the guy that SMU is looking like they're going to push their chips in on. Now, Trent Perry is somebody that Chris Kapko and this staff know very well. He's from the state of California. He's a top 50 prospect. He's a borderline 5-star for On3. He's been released from his national letter of intent with USC. If they get Drew Thelwell, probably means without attrition that Trent Perry is somebody that would maybe be kind of a luxury to try and take. But again, this is where it's going to be interesting to see. And the portal window for basketball runs until April 30th in terms of the time to enter, which people, kind of, they want everything now in basketball. Basketball has a long window. Football does not. Football has a 15-day window that started Tuesday. If you're listening to this podcast on Tuesday, basketball has a transfer portal window that's 45 days that started at the end of the regular season or at the end of conference championships. That's a long window. There are still players that are going to enter the portal. There are still rosters that can be shifting and changing. We're seeing that a lot. We're seeing tons of guys enter, and we're seeing some guys decide on where they're going to play their next round of college basketball. So there's a lot of time to work all this out. And I think Trent Perry is somebody that could end up being a guy that SMU brings in to visit if there ends up being attrition and if Drew Thelwell ends up not ending up at SMU. But the goal is to address the backcourt with somebody who can help them this year. And this is where the line that they walk, right? If SMU staff, the new SMU staff, obviously, was gung-ho all in on Trent Perry would be the guy. And they think he's a good player. They recruited him at USC. He's a top 50 overall prospect. He's one of the best point guards in the country. He's having a great week, or had a great week, at the McDonald's All-American camp. Still, you've got to balance the priority of, can this guy be the guy for us in year one, or do we need to go bring in a veteran? And that's kind of the balance that they have to walk, because they worked out this team. this new coaching staff, and they don't think the cupboard is bare, in particular in the backcourt. And so that's why we're going to see SMU probably push for Drew Thelwell, SMU is pushing for Drew Thelwell, and then they'll assess if the roster changes, if they can go out and get another guard. That's part one. Part 2 and 3, as you move to the 3, is going to be upgrading that position. And that's why they brought in a Brody Kozlowski for a visit. They had Jacoby Coles, a TCU transfer, on campus for an unofficial visit on Friday. We broke the news of that on the Pony Express for our subscribers. If you aren't on the board, be sure to be there so that you guys can get all the latest scoop on what is going on with SMU. Jacoby Coles is going to be interesting. He's a guy that is now gaining interest from Kentucky. They have jumped into the mix, according to multiple reports, as has Auburn, Grand Canyon. Numerous programs are after Jacoby Coles, who could play that 3, play that 4, but you got to love what he could bring to SMU. We know that SMU needed to improve on its shooting, and a guy that shot, I believe, 42% from three-point range last year could do just that. And then you've got the ability to just score from the field, and I think that's something that Jacoby Coles did rather well. On top of that, he started 11 games for the Horned Frogs last season in 31 games, and he's going to be and is one of the top available transfers in the portal. He's from Denton, played at Denton Guyer. SMU has Deuce Harmon on its roster now. His brother or cousin, Davion Harmon, I think brother, did play with Jacoby Coles, I believe, at Guyer as well. Again, this is kind of the end of a lot of these guys who have played a ton of college basketball with these 5-6 year type of players. And SMU would love to bring in Jacoby Coles. That's the bottom line here. And when you look at his ability to shoot 49% from the field, that's something that SMU would love to bring in. Now the competition is shifting a little bit. They've got to get through this and get him on board. I think it would be a terrific land if they could get Jacoby Coles. Again, somebody that could kind of hand things off to a Chance Puryear or Brody Kozlowski if they were able to get Brody on board at the 3. And you have Jaheim Hudson who plays there as well. So that position would then be in good shape. Now, the final question for this roster is, what in the world does your front court look like? Because you have Mitchell Holmes, who we mentioned, and you have Keon Ambrose Hilton coming back. That is scary. And Andy Enfield likes to play with a bigger lineup from what it seems like over the course of his career at USC. But he really likes guys who are athletic and can run. They like to play with pace, and they love to dunk the basketball. They're one of the top teams in the entire country when it comes to dunking the basketball over the course of the last decade. They just consistently find ways to dunk the basketball. And that means you have athletes. That means you have guys that can, play with their head above the rim, so to speak. And that is where the priority is going to be. And so when you have Jacoby Coles, you have some different guys out there that you would love to find a way to bring in that would settle everything down and bring in some veteran leadership. That's all well and good, but you can also bring in some other talent. And I'm intrigued to see how SMU handles this. And this is kind of the mystery because, and this is where the nuanced discussion that we have to have about this is really kind of paramount, because people are saying, well, what's the deal with the front court? What's the deal? Are you saying that they're not going to address it? No, I just don't know. I don't know how they're going to address it, because you have Xavier Foster and Mo Njai who leave, but you have now Keon Ambrose Hilton, Jaheim Hudson, Ricardo Wright, Denver Anglin, Chuck Harris, Jalen Smith, Zurich Phelps, BJ Edwards. That's 8. Then you bring in Mitchell Holmes, Chance Puryear. That's 10. You want a guard, a true point guard. That's 11. And now you're kind of like, okay, well, Brody Kozlowski just visited, Jacoby Coles just visited. Would you take both? Probably, I would think. And then all of a sudden you're at 13. So that's what makes it interesting in terms of the discussion right now, is that judging by the actions of the staff in terms of who they're bringing in and when, it's just a question. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Doesn't mean they're not working on things, but it is intriguing that we haven't seen a true big just pop in and visit SMU, or we haven't seen somebody really linked to SMU from the big men ranks. They recruited Malik Dia, who ended up committing to Ole Miss. He was more of a power forward. That would have been power forward 3. That would have been a really good pickup for SMU. But again, they're still working through things. And I think that's important to note, is that not everything is going to come right away. And that's kind of the big takeaway with the transfer portal. So I think you would love to start seeing some commitments. You would love to start seeing some news. Trust me, I know people are ready for it. They think, and I mean, rightfully, wrongfully, whatever, football, you see a guy enter, you see them tied to a program, doesn't mean SMU, but any program. And sometimes you see a decision happen pretty quickly and you know how it went down and all of those things. Basketball just seems to be a little different, more so unless guys are following coaches, like we've seen some of a couple Kentucky guys follow Cal to Arkansas. The big man from Kentucky just committed there. You've seen Indiana State's big forward follow his coach to St. Louis. There just seems to be more of a process in basketball. And they're going to set visits. They're going to have a group of schools, and they're going to go through it. And that's just where it's different. And that's why the 45-day window also kind of makes a little bit more sense for basketball, despite there being far too many players in the portal to begin with. It is very much a sport that is built on you're recruiting somebody, you're going after them, they're going to set some visits, they're going to take their visits, and then they're going to sit down with their family and make a decision. And that's just kind of how it's ingrained in basketball and basketball recruiting. So I'm very intrigued to see where this staff goes. As it stands, they don't have any transfer or high school commitments since being hired, but it's still relatively early, believe it or not. So we will be tracking it all of it at ontheponyexpress.com. Really excited about the new era of SMU basketball so far. Just really happy with how we've been received on our end with the new coaching staff. So should be fun to follow and see where they go. And a lot of interest at ontheponyexpress.com. So be sure to head over there and join for just $1 for 2 months using code SMU1. That's exclusive for you guys listening on our podcast network. SMU, the number 1. Put that in the promo code when you subscribe in just seconds to ontheponyexpress.com. You can get all the latest on football, basketball transfer news, and who they're going after. So join us. We've had a ton of people jump on board in the last month. It's been a huge moment of growth for the site, so we're excited about that. Before we let you go, we got to remind you guys, once again, head to statusjet.com. Talk to our friends David Henry and his team, and they will walk you through their process of how to put you in the right plane for the right trip. This is going to be a really fun year with Status Jet, talking about some different ways that they can help you guys out as you guys work with them more on your next trip, whether it be with family, friends, or business. They can really get you from point A to point B with that level of luxury that you would expect. And there are plenty of luxury destinations we're going to be talking about this week as summer approaches in particular that you're going to want to get to, places that are harder than most, where a private jet, a charter might make more sense. So be sure to head to statusjet.com, learn more about what David Henry and his team can do for you. And also, guys, head to biggameusa.com. Use code BEON3 for 10% off your order and free shipping. That is where the official game ball, right over my shoulder, of SMU is made. It's right here in Addison. Preston Stone, Kevin Jennings, they work with them on the game ball, what they want, how they want it to feel, all the different laces and different things that they can do with the leather. Get your official game ball at biggameusa.com. Use code BE, that's the letters BEON, the number 3, for 10% off your order plus free shipping. Applies for any game ball you want to get. So if you have another family or friend that wants a game ball for their school, you can usually find it at biggameusa.com. So with that, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this edition of the podcast. We're now 2 for 2 on the week. We'll be back to talk a lot more about SMU football, closing out spring ball, and we'll also talk recruiting later this week. on the Pony Express podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we will catch you guys later this week with another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU On3 and on Instagram at On3SMU. And keep it locked to OnThePonyExpress.com for more coverage.